met at a civil rights rally. You know, my mother used to run with the Black Panthers. My father led rallies and was an activist himself. I am the leader and co-founder of Black Lives Matter Greater New York. I'm also the co-founder of Black Opportunities, which is an organization founded in the liberation of Black people. But make no mistake about it, when Black people are wronged across the globe, we stand tall and fight for them. We also have our own school here in the South Bronx where we teach our kids a proper education, not founded in white supremacy like public schools here in New York City. And long story short, I make a lot of noise, I cause a lot of trouble, and I'm always here to fight for the people. Thanks for having me.
Wow, that's amazing. Your parents actually met at the Black Panthers, so it's in your DNA.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You know, I don't know a lot about. I haven't read much, but obviously my undergrad, I was poli-sci major. So how Black Panther is dismantled by federal government, you know what I'm saying, and the good they used to do for the community. And I think Black Panthers, have they been around long enough? Like they probably have we would probably have seen a different society, is what I really think, unfortunately, for our brothers, African American in America. It's an interesting conversation we'd love to have. By the way,
absolutely.
I'm an author and I wrote a chapter about Black Americans. I'll give you my book.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Haq. It's really pleasure and an honor to hear someone, you know, with such a background, you know what I'm saying, it's in DNA. And I think everybody knows by now about Black Lives Matter. The movement, you know, I mean, if there's nothing else, I mean, it's not like start with the George Floyd, but it's long before, but, you know, that event solidified. And I think a lot of elected officials, Americans, lawmakers took it seriously. So that's an interesting conversation. Someday, I, as an African, and then you as an American, African American, there's so much disconnect even within our own community. And
absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. All right, my brother, and next up came from you, and is Ahmed. Ahmed, please go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit.
Okay, thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Ahmed Muhammad. I'm an attorney here with CARE New York, the Council on American Islamic Relations. We're a civil rights and Muslim organization. I'm Yemeni American as well. And, you know, this issue really is something that kind of was very emotional for me to see last year, not only because of the scale of the devastation and the amount of individuals who were murdered, but really the silence that, you know, we all saw last year when this happened, especially now when we're comparing it with the Ukrainian war and refugee crisis. I'm really excited and honored to be in presence with all of you, and more so just to learn from all of you and the excellent work you're doing and how individuals like myself, you know, could help you all with that advocacy efforts to make sure we get justice for everyone who was slaughtered a year ago.
Like I say, I'm going to be very entertaining host. It's you mentioned, I mentioned it too, but you mentioned about how the refugees, I mean, obviously we're really happy, you know, what's happening in Ukraine, how the refugees have been welcomed. You have Canada and this country, like, hey, we're ready, you know what I'm saying, we're ready. But it was just, I don't know, maybe last week that refugees in brown skin countries, that in the case of Palestine, in the case of, by no means, I'm very crystal clear, with all due respect with you guys, the racism Black people face in this brown country, in India, in Malaysia, and in Arab countries, the type of racism Black people face, because almost I feel like we overpopulated this planet, because every corner I look, there's a Oromo who are desperately fleeing. So it's very interesting you mentioned about Ukraine. But I'm really, I can't wait to hear, like, you as a lawyer, you know, obviously, and that's part of our ask you letter. It's just like, you know, is there even base when people are tired of refugees nowadays? Anyway, I'm not going to ask you that. So my next victim is this young man is really, really amazing. Actually, I'm so impressed by him. Hassan, please go ahead and take your time, introduce yourself. Your passion really, really is something unique for me.
Thank you very much, Sina. So my name is Hussam Qayed. I am also a Yemeni American born and raised in Yemen. So I grew up, in Yemen with the culture of generosity and kindness, and that's the background that I come from. I come to America, and over the years, the war breaks out in Yemen, and I have a very deep rooted connections to the homeland, and I still have a lot of my family members going through, the what we like to call, what the world is often dubs as the world's forgotten war, and it's a statement that I very much disagree with. I feel like it's covered to a decent amount, but there is nobody taking it beyond. And I work for the Washington Center for Yemeni Studies. It's a think tank just starting, and the idea of it, or the mission, is to basically provide nuanced research from the Yemeni perspective, because the majority of the material that the U.S. foreign policy is based on comes from white people that like are to take one English course or one Arabic course and instantly become experts on any country that is of interest to them. And last year, we Bridges for Yemen is a group of literally just a bunch of college students who had the same concern about the homeland and how the war was not coming to an end anytime soon, and that we have a role to play, and there's a lot of advocacy to be done for Yemen that was not being done at all. And we come from the I love the quote. I feel like Hawk has mentioned that some rallies that we've attended together, of we're not outnumbered, but we are out organized. As Yemeni Americans, there's a huge like diaspora in the States, and there are smaller communities who are doing a lot more work for their community, like for their countries back home, and like even on a local level. So we came together. We put Bridges to Yemen together in January, and like we were just very hesitant about making the first move. And unfortunately, this unfortunate uh, massacre that happened on March 7th was the thing that gave us the push forward. Of there is no way, like, because we saw that it was not being covered at all. So that was the push that gave us, and that was actually the first post on our social media. The first action that we did was we put up together a coalition of 13 Oromo and Yemeni organizations and held a press conference. We were very optimistic, thinking that the press conference would lead to a petition. We were thinking about resettling like Oromo refugees in third countries, and like in reality, like the idealism after the idealism wall is gets taken down, you realize that there's a lot more work to be done, and it's not that simple. So now we're more realistic with our expectations, and we're fortunate to meet Sina to guide us in the right direction, so we could focus the efforts more effectively and actually bear their fruits.
Uh, Sam, you mentioned like the optimism that you guys started. It's very interesting, right? You thought you could move this planet, and then I think we got beat up to the point like we can't even see far anymore now. Like what I'm saying. I think that's what makes young people so unique, is that they have not lived the life, they have not experienced, they don't know it can't be done. You know what I'm saying? That's what makes it so beautiful. And I think whereas like myself at least, that as immigrants, so we are all born in another country, have an accent, and we do some amazing work, but there's just no resource there, and there's really no support there. You can't even pay your renters. So thank you so much for introducing yourself, everyone. So the way I had in mind is, okay, I think we lost How could be back, but anyway, he'll be the last person I have in mind to kind of talk a little bit. So we're all gonna come from different angle. So I will start off with the just general the backstory, like long before this migrant or refugees reached Yemen. What is the cause that's really getting them to that point, in thousands living there? So I want to paint, maybe if I take 5 minutes and paint it and talk about that. And then I want to Teresa. I'm so sorry, Teresa did not introduce herself. Teresa, please. I'm so glad I called myself. I'm good. Okay.
No, don't worry. I'll keep it really, really quick. Basically, I've just had the privilege of working with OLLAA for the past a bit more than a year now, and it's been my job to lead on Yemen and Kenya, and to really be looking at what's been happening to refugees and migrants that have been forced to leave Ethiopia, and unfortunately, the often really difficult and tragic path that they can then go down. And so I've been following what's been happening basically over this 1 year period since the fire and the massacre 1 year ago. But we'll touch on more about that in a minute. So back to you, Senna.
Thank you so much. And I saved myself, Teresa. Thank you very much. By the way, guys, and for all of the audience that are watching us online live, as well as later on, Teresa is the expert who is engaged directly with UNHCR, with the IOM and Red Cross and other agencies in Yemen, and obviously working very hard in the case of Kenya as well. We have much more success in Yemen case compared to Kenya, but the situation is kind of very similar. And she have done huge, big publication, or 3 publication, each of them I think 6 to 8 page long. It literally shows the journey that the slave trade, the route slave trade took 100, 200 years ago is the same route the current refugees, migrants are taking to come to Yemen. And they used to be in chains. Today they are voluntarily walking. So so I can, and obviously that's why I'm leaving that side of the story in terms of Yemen to her. And then let's see, and then I will just simply a little bit cover just what brought the Oromos, what brought the Ethiopian refugees to Yemen. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then Teresa will cover in terms of the issues within Yemen from the moment they arrive. We're all going to take about 5 minutes, and then obviously I'm going to ask from the legal side, and then I'm going to ask the young men, the way the treatment of the like after the bombing, the Ethiopian workers who work at the hospital or medical facility were told not to come to hospital. Why? And then the last person I will ask is obviously Hawk. I will ask generally, say, how the migrants in the case of Oromos or Yemen treated, and now you have Europe, and how does what does he think about as an American? So that is the kind of the order that I plan to go for the first round. And so I'll start out with myself. So my name is Sena Jimjimo. I am the executive director for OLLAA. OLLAA is an advocacy organization mainly that covers Oromo community across the whole world, from America to Europe, Australia, and Canada. And we don't really focus in the Middle East or Africa because all of them are like kind of in crisis mode. So these are the government. We engage with the government, US government, UN, and different agencies. Is like we engage with them. Oromos are the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia. Depending who you hear or which you read, they make somewhere between 45 to 60% of the population. So imagine 60% of out of 120 million that. Yet they make less than 15% of the bureaucracy, over 90% of the prison. This is not under the current prime minister, that this was the case under previous regime, and so on and so forth, since the state of Ethiopia was created, or the empire of Ethiopia was created. Ethiopia have always been an open prison to Oromo people. It was crime. It is still crime to be Oromo in Ethiopia. And in part, this is the reason why you have thousands of Oromos leaving Ethiopia, because it is simply not safe for them. You have to, it's almost like you have to adapt into Ethiopianism. You must wear the Ethiopian colors. You must speak the Ethiopian language. You must practice Ethiopian religion and culture to really be Ethiopian. If not, you are foreign. It doesn't matter if you are born there or if you are original or indigenous to there. And I come from long line of my grandfather. It was, in resistance movement against Haile Selassie. And I think some of us know or heard about Haile Selassie, how much he's admired by around the world. You know, I mean, if you take it to Jamaica, it's interesting. I met Bombardi's son when I used to work when I was younger. I used to work in hotel, and he had Haile Selassie's picture here, and I know who he was. I intentionally asked him, I'm like, "What is that?" He was like, he kissed it. He's like, "This is my God." So I come from a family whom Haile Selassie have committed ethnic cleansing against it. So it was interesting. Here am I seeing this man, this evil man that should be considered in the same sentence as Hitler, that he's being worshipped as a god. He's a wicked man. And then you have the Ethiopian history that trying to uplift. And this illusion in the West is also in personification of Haile Selassie, or beautifying Ethiopia as a country of both the Ethiopians, some of them, as well as the Western, have their huge hand in it, into creating the empire. Ethiopia have gotten at least maybe 70, 80 billion dollars in the last 100 years, but neither have transformed into democracy or stable region. And that is because the state of Ethiopia was created in dismantling and ethnic cleansing the Oromos and the many, many indigenous people in Ethiopia. Ethiopia can never have a peace, nor the region can have a stability, because Oromos are not only in Ethiopia, they are indigenous in Kenya, and they are also in Somalia and the whole region. Oromos are the largest ethnic group in the Horn of Africa, the third largest group in the whole continent of Africa. They come from Cushitic lineage, that's where they come from. But unfortunately, their culture, their language have been the target of the state of Ethiopia, to which the West have seen Ethiopia as Christian king island in the sea of Muslim, as they, some used to put it. But finally, you have our generation have put that to aside and have really brought the true face of Ethiopia. Is now more than ever, for the first time. We because of the work we do as OLLAA, now the world have seen or really hearing Ethiopia is not what people used to think. Ethiopia is and was always as a black hole for black people. In one hand, you have the black resistance against fascism in imperial Italy, but on the other hand, some of those leaders who never believed in being black. It is more about opportunity. When black is popular, they want to be black, but when the black is down, they want to be, let's just say, another race. So Oromos escaped prison in Ethiopia, some obviously in the betterment of life as a migrant, but the other ones more of a survivor, because they are prosecuted, they're escaping prison, they're escaping torture. Ethiopian prison is not normal, prison. It is very brutal system. They remove your hair, your nails. Rape is very, very common. Not and what's happening in Tigray. Obviously, as an Oromo, we stand with the people of Tigray who are facing genocide by the current genocidal regime. That the world failed them, and we feel their pain. But again, we're also experiencing something similar, but nobody's even talking about it. So Oromos escaped that, that kind of torture, and they leave to Kenya, to Sudan, to Yemen. There are over at least 700,000 migrants or workers or refugees, whatever you want to call it, in Saudi alone. And then there are at least 50 or more thousands in Kenya, in Somalia, in every country you name it, there are Oromos. There's not really a lot of countries that I've heard this where there's not Oromos, and the largest migrant they're moving. So we really have to look into what is the source that is pushing this people, Oromos, outside of the country. Let me stop it there, and because I already went too much. So I would like to ask Teresa, and as I say earlier, who has done the research, who have interviewed, who have talked to a lot of organizations, if you can just kind of give us the crisis. Obviously today, we are remembering a 1-year anniversary of Houthi massacre, where over 450 people had been murdered. I mean, what led to that one? Not literally led, actually. Maybe you can give us just the background of that based on the survivors and the family member, as well as the research you have uncovered in the last 1 year, Teresa. Please take 5 minutes.
Thanks, Sana. Yeah, so as Sana's mentioned, the Oromo have been facing historic marginalization and persecution for, over the course of the past 100 years, consecutive administrations who have sought to retain control or power through having to oppress this what is like the biggest ethnic group in Ethiopia. So what we've seen then is a lot of people who've been forced to fled, and we've seen that particularly during quite brutal times in these different administrations, where you see this movement of people fleeing towards Yemen, towards Kenya. And as Sana mentioned, the eastern route, which is the route that migrants and refugees take towards the Arabian Peninsula, is a particularly notorious one because it has such an infamous history, let's say, going back to what was the Indian Ocean slave trade or the East African slave trade, which is something that we really don't hear as much about as the Atlantic slave trade, for instance. It hasn't got the same coverage, but there was a lot of really also human life that was lost, a lot of children that were taken and trafficked to slave markets. And so there's this irony today that we're seeing young Ethiopians taking that same route, going by foot, experiencing really those same horrific conditions, because the trip itself is really, it's something that I, as a very lucky, privileged white person, can't even imagine having to go through, of walking for days under 40-degree heat with no guarantee of your safety, of food, and then arriving in what actually is a war zone. So here we're also talking about the fact that we have people who've been fleeing persecution from Ethiopia and arriving in Yemen, which is itself, one of the world's worst humanitarian crises that we've seen as well. And unfortunately, part of the thing that's at play here is that people aren't aware. A lot of these young, we're talking about young boys of around 17, 18, 19, who don't have opportunities at home. They live in regions that are more rural, or that, haven't had resources given to their areas, that have been experiencing drought, have been experiencing conflict, trying to find jobs and, new opportunities for themselves and their families, and no idea of what they're getting themselves into. And so what we've seen over the past 6, 7, 8 years now, since the civil war broke out in Yemen, since 2015, that the situation for migrants and refugees in Yemen has obviously gotten worse, just as the situation has for everybody else there. But it can be that those migrants and refugees are some of the most vulnerable members of that society, because they do not have clear rights often. So what happens is, these, particularly ones that don't qualify as refugees, and this is a bit of a tricky issue as well, where they say they're going to, for work rather than fleeing persecution as such, they get put into migrant detention centers by authorities. And these detention centers have some of the worst conditions in them that you could imagine. We're talking severe overcrowding. There's food shortages, there's a lack of sanitation and toilets, and there've been a lot of articles and research reports by human rights organizations like Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, showing just how bad the conditions are, where you had, and in this particular case, in this particular migrant detention center that we want to talk about today, there were more than 900 people put into a facility that was meant to house 300. So just to give you an idea, that is 3 times the amount of people crammed into that space that there should have been, without toilets, without sanitation. And this is also during the COVID time as well. So that, and we've got here is a video, and be warned that this is very graphic. And we might, I'll just get you to hold on from what, yeah. And what basically happened in this instance was that those detainees being held protested the conditions that they were in, rightly so, of the overcrowding, and they participated in a hunger strike. And because there are a lot of people crammed into that space, And we're also in this particular situation in Yemen, unfortunately, where the Houthi authorities in the north, where that migrant detention center were, there are a lot of tensions around, and the situation escalated. And so that the authorities, first of all, they started beating up those that were organizing the protests because they didn't want to see any sort of, they didn't want anything happening. They didn't like that the detainees were protesting these conditions. And then once that situation started to get there's more tensions, they actually ended up firing into the migrant detention center. And it's unclear exactly what they did, what projectiles went into that migrant detention center, but the result of it was that the entire detention center went up in flames and burned, which meant that more than 400 people burnt alive. And I've seen some footage from that event, and that's something that will stay with me forever. So imagining what it was like to be in that crowded detention center. No, really, at that point, how much hope do you have for your future? And then to have something like that happen. So today we want to really, take a moment to reflect on those poor, young, innocent people that simply, because they've kind of been lost to our eyes, their humanity is somehow been lost to our eyes also as an international community, that was allowed to take place. And today we also want to pay attention and really talk about those few survivors that managed to come out of that situation and who are today still feeling all of the effects from third-degree burns. And you can see just there is one of the survivors, what they look like today. But they're unable to get the assistance they need because of the situation, because of the political tensions, whatever is going on in that situation. That means it is very hard to, it is hard to get assistance to people, but we have to try, and we have to be having this conversation and remembering that here is a young boy he was 17 when he came to Ethiopia. He's now, when he came to Yemen, sorry, he's now 19. And that's going to be his reality for the next, for the rest of his life. And to do what we can to help, and this, I can't even put it into words, but I think it's really, that's what today we really need to be thinking about as a community and as an international community, that we have let this happen and we're continuing to let it happen.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I wanted to, I kind of been debating, that video is original, have not been showed. We asked our volunteers to record it, and kind of we wanted to show it. Like Teresa said, this is 17 years young man. Just imagine 17 years young man who left his country. Might be, I don't know. I mean, we have a report that that I've shared it in the chat for everybody. His journey, that he left his mom and dad, walked many days, many weeks to make it to Yemen, and he is caught by Yemeni Houthis, put in detention center for months, goes on hunger strike in a hope of being free. And at the age of 19, 20, this is who he is. What does the future, how many us remember, people like that? And this is called for my own community, for the whole world. And it's very heartbreaking. And thank you so much, Teresa. I know where you were talking about, General kind of brought in and absolutely distracted you, and the graphic. And I apologize, our audience and everybody, that that is graphic. It's a raw footage, and that it's really, when we talk, sometimes when you talk about atrocity, it becomes a number. But when you see the person, I felt like, like we're talking about 19 years old kid. We're talking about 17 years old. I have a niece who will be in 17, both of them in high school. You know what I'm saying? This is who he is, and this is his destiny. He's not even 20, and he have no future. and there's no justice that's been done. And I think I wanted to thank you, Teresa, one more. So I'll say, so up next, I'll just ask just a little bit, Hassan, if he can just talk about from angle, because Hassan, yes, yes, I know you're born in Yemen, but you're more of like an American that grew up here, and you watch your own country, your own people too, that a country once you used to remember, as you say, for generosity, I'm saying, for generosity. And an interesting thing is that what the Oromos always fascinate me is like in Oromos in Ethiopia is like they get killed, and then after they die, the killer takes their pictures like, look what the Oromos did to me. This has been the experience of Oromo in Ethiopia. They not only die, but their victim becomes the victimizers, and they use their pictures, their story, to collect money, to seek justice. So I feel like in the case of Yemen, when lots of Ethiopian medical workers were told to stay, not come to work, what could it be? What I'm saying? And as Yemen, I can only imagine too. The country is in a civil war. Yemenis are, we're talking about Houthis gangs, who you have the Saudis, the evil of all. Of course, people want to be against Saudi, and I can understand that, and I am against too. But then on this side, you have Houthis who are recruited. If you could just talk a little bit about Sam, as a young man, what was that felt like? Your country doing, such a thing, and has been the Houthis. Doing this, and just talk about take a few minutes, and definitely I'm going over me talking too much. Go ahead.
No, not at all. It's something. It's one of the things that you mentioned, and it's something that we as Yemenis have been experienced with the way the war has been covered. We're often given like these inflated numbers of like the world's worst humanitarian crisis, or every 10 minutes a child dies, and it's the concept of you kill one man, it's a tragedy. You kill a million, and they become mere statistics. And that's what, like, that was the crazy part about this specific incident when we first heard Mr. Jamada Suti Al Urumi on Arab news media talking about, like, given the real numbers of, it's actually not the 44 people that were reported in some of the Arab media that first covered it. It's actually, we have insiders. There are people, like witness accounts, survivors are calling us and telling us this is exactly what went down. And again, like, from that came, the mission, or the idea of the press conference, to give the incident its due right, its fair share of coverage. And recently we saw, just like a month, late February or like late January, Saudi Arabia actually uh, bombed a prison in Sa'da, who ironically, the Houthis had also Oromo refugees and migrants in that detention facility, all the way in the north, in the border city of Sa'da 2 years ago. And like, specifically, even with that, it was interesting to see the coverage that received when the perpetrators were Saudi Arabia. And just going back, just to give some context, like, of Yemen, the Houthi rebel group carried out a coup against the Yemeni government in 2014, and then they exiled the government. The government is physically in Saudi Arabia. The president and his, all, like, the major ministers are all physically in Saudi Arabia, and they called for the Saudi-led coalition to restore them to power. And it's been 8 years since. And basically, I haven't lived half of my life in Yemen. My idea, or like my conceptions, my interactions with Black people in general, Black Yemenis, or like the Black Yemenis who are just everywhere around us. And then the Somali Yemenis, like in the Somali and Ethiopian Yemenis are second, third generation intermarried, like mixed families. And I actually have some of my distant relatives are actually physically in Ethiopia because of the relations that go, like, whether because of trade, whether. So it was very personal to me. And one of the things that didn't really make sense to me is the idea of refugees in Yemen, because I know how the situation is in Yemen. But it made sense when I read more to it, and it became clear that Yemen is just a mere passageway for these Oromos and the migrants who come from the Horn of Africa. Yemen is a passageway for them to get to the Gulf countries and beyond. And go into to just like the specificities of the massacre itself. one of the main reasons that those migrants were held in that detention facility to begin with is that the Houthis have been for years exploiting the most vulnerable part of society to recruit them to fight on their front lines. So there are like full like brigades of migrants, full brigades of other like black Yemenis fighting for the Houthis out of desperation, not because they necessarily believe in their cause, but out of desperation, and they're left with no choice. And a bunch of human rights organizations in Yemen and human rights monitors, such as SAMS for human rights, for rights and liberties, Miyun, Rust, have all documented that those some of yeah, like those specific migrants in that detention facility were given two options to either fight in the front lines or pay a large sum of money that if they had, they wouldn't even be refugees. And the protest and the hunger strike came as a result of that. No, we're not going to fight for you. And we obviously don't have the insane sum of money that you're asking us for. And just beyond the, after the massacre happened, from the details and from the eyewitness accounts, the people were rushed to the hospital, the ones that were still barely alive, and that's where the 44 the 44 people died figure comes from. Was the 44 people died who like were rushed to the hospital and passed at the hospital, and then the footage of 44 body bags being buried. But recently, one of the survivors actually told us that they would actually, even inside those body bags that they promoted as the only people who died at the massacre, they would put they would be several bodies in a single body bag, which were the videos that the Houthi authorities themselves shared. And what they also did is they gathered quote unquote community leaders from Somalia, from Ethiopia, from Djibouti, like the nationalities who like were there at the detention center. The majority of them were obviously Oromos, and had them basically say, "Oh, it's an accident. It happens. We don't really need to look beyond it. It was just like 45 people, basically taking away the magnitude of this atrocity, which is literally after 8 years of war, the largest single day massacre in Yemen's modern history, even with that with 8 years of war going on. And what happened afterwards, one of the very interesting details of the amount of security that was done. Of IO1 personnel were not allowed to go in and investigate, take pictures or anything. It even expanded to the point where the hospital staff and the janitors and the even the sanitation department workers, who the majority of them in Yemen are black, had anybody who comes around that area, that whole area where the detention facility was, the passport detention facility, it was locked down. Nobody was allowed to access except the high level Houthis who would know how to cover best. And then at the hospital, the sanitation workers, the janitors had their phones taken away to ensure that nothing gets recorded or leaked out. And after that, after this happened, and the IOM, UNHCR just condemning when they themselves didn't play the role of basically absolving themselves of the responsibility that they are supposed to do. The Houthis did very similar thing of actually before the Houthis did that, it was something that I came across. It's actually one of the most fascinating thing to me, that just 7 days after the massacre, on the 14th of March 2021, a group of Oromos and other actually all like black Yemenis, Somalians, Sudanese, Djibouti, like people from Djibouti actually came back in front of the UNHCR, IOM, and next to the detention facility, protesting for the rights, for justice, for accountability, in a place that is like it was just like very brave thing to do that. Like this is the place where the first massacre, and the Houthis have no fear of they could basically shoot you and do the same exact thing, and there will be no consequences for it. And they still went ahead and protested very brave place. And then the Houthis, right after that, they basically gathered the refugees in like huge trucks, and they drove them to cities, like the border of the cities under government control, to absolve themselves of the responsibility of taking care of the refugees. And they had them walk through like literally hundreds of miles to get to Aden, where the other UNHCR and IOM offices are. And when they got there, um, the UNHCR, which they were protesting in front of in Sana'a, because the UNHCR in Sana'a is actually compromised, and one of the people that OLLAA is actually, Sina, you know who I'm talking about. Arafat Jibril, who is an Oromo attorney in Yemen, said that hold on, I lost my train of thought. Where was I going with that?
Compromised. You say it was the UNHCR was compromised.
Yes. So Arafat Jibril being that she was bilingual, what would happen is when she was residing in Sana'a, the Houthis would literally go to her house, take her to like secret facilities where they will be FaceTiming or basically Zoom. I don't know what technical method they use, but to connect with the Oromo fighters on the front lines for her to translate, because she speaks both Oromo and Arabic, of basically encouraging them, you're doing the right thing, you're fighting for the sake of God, and the whole Houthi narrative, like to reclaim the state of God. You're doing something holy. Whoever dies of you is a martyr. And she was specifically told by one of the Houthis, don't you dare think about like raising concern or complaining about what we do to you, to the UNHCR in Sana'a, because they are all our people. That's one of the things that she was told by one of the Houthi people that would take her to these facilities to translate their conversations with the fighters for moral support, quote unquote. And then the UNHCR in Aden, which is under government territory or under the Southern Transitional Council, who is the de facto rulers of Aden, and under the Riyadh Agreement in 2018, they are technically a part of the legitimate government. So we hold the legitimate government accountable for the functionality of the UNHCR as well as the funders in the UN itself. There was no adequate response. There was no aid being provided for the survivors. They were just left to protest outside. And there was also on some instances where actually one documented instance is even on Arafat Jibril's, if you go back to her Twitter account, of some refugees being ran over by cars because of either blocking traffic or they're just in the way, and not even being provided the treatment from the sole functioning UNHCR office in Yemen.
Yes. Thank you so much.
I just want to end with the very interesting part, the thing that has brought Yemen to the forefront of the international media over the last couple of days was Angelina Jolie, who is a special envoy of the UNHCR. She is physically in Yemen, the very famous actor. She is physically in Yemen, and it's very interesting that it's literally on the 1-year anniversary of the massacre, and the UNHCR is getting all this coverage because the donors conference is approaching, and I'm assuming that's a part of the reason of the marketing campaign of the UNHCR to get funded. They sent her to show the situation to get more funds, but I hope, and my plea is that the UNHCR and the IOM and all the international organizations concerned with treating refugees and migrants are funded adequately to the point where they're able to treat the problem as it is right now. And ideally, if I'm going back to the Hussam from last year for Bridges for Yemen, find a way and a mechanism to resettle these Oromos and other migrants in third countries, because Yemen is obviously not safe for them. They go to Saudi Arabia and they are hundreds and thousands of them are imprisoned and faced by inhuman treatments. I wouldn't say it's that much different from what the Houthis, the conditions that the Houthis hold them in Sana'a, with the exception of that they haven't been bombed yet, ? And yeah, it's the third world countries. There are Oromo communities that have expressed willingness and ability. If we can bring them in, we could take care of them in Canada and in other countries, a part of the coalition that we formed last year. And it remains as pleased, and we will continue advocating as much as we could and hopefully doing our part.
Thank you so much, Hassan. I'm so sorry. It's really a lot of questions I would love to even ask each of you, because I remember you mentioned what does this mean? Angelina Jolie is there. I'm saying nobody's talking about independent investigation. And 1 year later, what happened to these refugees? And we only have about 12 minutes, and I want us to jump on it. And for our audience who are watching us, we have shared already tweets over you. We are right now running a Twitter campaign to raise awareness about what's the survivors. We are asking for investigation. We are asking for aid. For example, IOM is operating in 5% of the budget, and UN is not really freely operating. And I think Teresa will be so much happy to talk about really the challenge they have under Houthi. We just don't have a lot of time. And then also we have a petition. I already said that petition. We have petition, we have Twitter campaign, we have advocacy, a lot of things that you can do. So if you're listening into and wondering what can you do, there's a bunch of publication in our website, OLLAA.org. Feel free to reach out there. In this event, this conversation is honestly, as you know, you can see amazing people. It's sponsored by our team here, you know, from Black Lives Matter, as you guys know, and our attorney, you know, Mr. Ahmed, you know, as well as the Bridges for Yemen, that's sponsored, and we did this event together, and we, you know, work very, very hard. So I hope you take part and join this group. Volunteer, keep making a noise. So let me just jump onto you, my brother Ahmed Mohammed here. You are from the legal background. So you've heard the kind of the background situation in Ethiopia. You heard a little bit of, you know, how they got here in the route they took, you know, what Teresa said, and then how, you know, how even after they died and they were sealed out. And if, you know, if what happened is such a accident fire, then why is the place sealed out at the same time? You know, do we have legal, because one thing that the UN says is that are not, you know, refugees. These are, they have, because the UN does not register them as a refugee, it's not open. So how are they supposed to register? Do they have a legal base for this?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I think that, you know, something that just drawn off the bat, I think we can all agree that it's a moral travesty. Just hearing Teresa, hearing Hussam, and just remembering the events as I was learning about them last year, really gut-wrenching. And just to put things into context, I know earlier we started talking about Ukraine. To put things into context, there were 450 people, Oromo, innocent individual human beings who were burned alive a year ago. Right now, Russia is being accused of killing 400 civilians in its war and invasion of Ukraine, an entire nation, right? And they've been bombing Ukraine for over a week. 400 civilians. We're talking about a massacre, a Houthi killing of 450 individuals in one incident, right? Ukraine right now is getting wall-to-wall coverage 24/7. Every single news website, every single news organization on TV, United States, all around the world. You couldn't find the Oromo massacre anywhere when it happened, right? That's very important, right? Out of sight, out of mind, right? And we know that negative publicity, negative news is important. Otherwise, the Houthis would not seal up a location for an accident. When an accident happens, you open it up so you allow first responders to help individuals get the help that they need. You don't take cell phones away from individuals so they don't leak photos or videos to the public. You don't, you know, cram bodies into single body bags in order to hide, you know, the number of individuals you've killed. And it really shows the lack of accountability that we're seeing from the UN and other countries. And it's really shameful because I think when you look at it at the end of the day, like what has happened here to the Oromos is, you know, very classical way of, you know, a war crime being committed during an armed conflict. And there is an armed conflict. The Houthis are fighting the legitimate government of Yemen and other groups there for, you know, supremacy over Yemen. So there is an armed conflict. What's very different about war crimes is that, you know, they can happen to non-combatants like civilians. In the same way right now, Russia is being accused of targeting civilians, of committing war crimes by bombing civilian neighborhoods where there may not be Ukrainian armed individuals or where the fighting may not be between the two armies. That's what happened here. We have a Houthi militia that in essence targeted a civilian population, an area that they were under total control of, where they were inhumanely holding innocent individuals worse than cattle, and decided to inflict grave harm upon hundreds and hundreds of individuals, when we haven't seen any accountability. What I want to do right now really is make sure that everyone's just listening to go to your change.org petition and make sure to sign that petition. To make sure to go to your website and tweet about this, because I know one thing that works in our work when we do advocacy is we just need people. If we're doing a live event in person, we need people to show up, right? If we're doing a online campaign, we need people to participate. And if you care about the Oromo, if you care about innocent lives, if you care about justice, if you say you're Muslim, you can spare 10 seconds to click on that change.org petition and let the UN, right? Let your representatives know what you care about, because that's what this is. When these organizations get an outcry from the American public and others, they're going to respond. When no one is listening, when no one cares, the UN doesn't care either, right? Just 2 days ago, the United States pledged almost $3 billion to Poland so they can take care of Ukrainian refugees, right? All of a sudden, Europe, which hates refugees if you're brown and black, has opened their doors unconditionally, right, to Ukrainians. Of course, unless you're a black or a brown Ukrainian trying to cross, that's a little bit different. And they've allowed almost 2 million Ukrainian refugees into the other neighboring European countries, right? When it was, Arab refugees, African refugees, when they are crammed in boats trying to, survive, escaping persecution, they were being killed or allowed to die and drown in the waters. And so we need to stand up. We need to speak out. Just imagine this, and I'll end with this. In 2015, a year after the Houthis took control of Yemen, in 2015, ISIS captured a Jordanian fighter. Either they shot down his fighter plane or it had a malfunction. They captured him, and then they posted a video where they burned him alive in a cage. And it shook the whole entire world. It didn't shake the world, though. We know this now. It didn't shake the world because they burned a man alive, right? It shook the world because, the world doesn't like Islam and Muslims, and that was the boogeyman doing something terrible, right? You have the exact same situation here, except it's not called ISIS, right? It's called the Houthis, but they're not a terrorist organization, and America doesn't care about the Houthis the way they care about ISIS, right? But they burned 450 people alive, and there are hundreds more right now suffering because of it. And there are families all around that region right now that are still suffering because of it as well. They're not getting the help that they need. They didn't get the help that they needed on day one. There was no worldwide reaction, not even condemnation from many countries. And we're talking about an atrocity that probably fits squarely within what a war crime is according to international law. And the Houthis have been continued to operate in this way without really any repercussions.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. We can literally talk so much about what you say, how the world react, I'm saying that. And then also each of us, there are many people online watching in live now. Have you signed the petition? Have you tweeted? Have you went to protest? Have you called your Congress? Have you let the international people know about it? Because when you say something, there is a hope for it. But if you don't, there's nothing else. And I think I scheduled back-to-back another panel discussion in Afaan Oromoo. That's the only way I'm rushing, but I'd love to have you guys back and really have a debate about this. You know what I'm saying? Black and brown skin, and then the racism that exists within ourselves, you know, that exists. And then also, like, because as your skin goes darker, so is the brutality goes darker. So I'll just, you know, jump onto our last panelist to kind of speak. I obviously, Mr. Haq Newsom is, you know, member of the leader of the New York based Black Lives Matter. I don't think anybody need to be reintroduced about who the BLM are and what they have done, especially in the last, I don't know, 2-3 years. And finally, after, you know, many centuries, I would say, that people are paying attention that racism does exist. So I'll just give our last speaker before I go, and I just wanted to remind our viewers, please make sure you sign the petition, make sure you tweet. There's a Twitter campaign going on right now. Make sure you volunteer if there's a way you can do that. This is, you know, by this event is put together, you know, between the three of us, as we say that, Bridges for Yemen, our, you know, our organization, Black Lives Matter leaders speaking here today with us in our organization. So please make sure you sign up, check us out, check all of our organization out. There is a press release already out, that's, you know, and there's a bunch of research that have been done over the last 12 months. My brother Haq, please go ahead. And what my question for you is that you are an American, and you've seen what Ahmed have said, and you've also heard about what Hassan and as well as Teresa has said, the background from Ethiopia, the journey in Yemen, and the, you know, what the way people reacted it, how 450 over 400 people burned alive. There was no coverage. A year later, there's nothing. And obviously, what's happening in Ukraine is very sad and unfortunate. I mean, when there was a brown and black, there's just no room for it. As Black Lives Matter leader, as someone who come from you know, Black Panthers background, honestly, like this in your DNA, is like, how do you view that? I mean, how should people look at this? And one of the challenges that we have is we need to work with the Black Lives Matter. We are not doing a good job as Africans to really partner with this Black Lives Matter. This issue is our issue, and for Black Lives Matter. So, because if those Oromos, 450 was Arabs, the news would have been different. If they were white, the news would be different. Even if they were Somalians or Ethiopian Amharas, the news would have been different. But because unfortunately they're Oromos, please you know, go ahead and take a few minutes and address from that angle.
Well, thank you for having me here. Honored to be in the presence of you all, Teresa, which you offer. The streets. Brother Ahmed is one of my favorite speakers in New York City. Like, when I show up to a press conference and I see him there, I know that there's going to be some truth told on that day, you know, and it's very important that we speak truth to power, that we speak truth to this white supremacist power structure that dominates the globe. And a lot of people might say, well, what do you mean by that? Because it's this huge, vague brush that you're painting with. Well, it is white supremacy that drives a fine line between our people. You want to know why Black Americans and Black Africans are not working together? Well, this is what they do. They drive a wedge between us. When you look at people who migrate to America, they're often warned not to associate with Black Americans. They're lazy, they're criminals, whatever they want to tell them to keep them away from us, right? It's amazing how anybody who comes to America that is white, by the time their second generation is born, they are accepted into mainstream society, right? But when you come to America as a Black people, you are instructed to separate yourselves from others and assimilate and conform into white American culture. The same thing happens globally. You gave a perfect example of the Ukraine. I personally understand, I don't like seeing innocent lives lost, but I don't have time to care about the Ukraine. Okay, I do not have time to care, because there was a map published that showed, after George Floyd, where Black Lives Matter protests were held, and there were none in the Ukraine, right? When I looked up and I saw my African brothers and sisters not being allowed on those trains, that broke my heart. So why should I care, right? Why should Black people be forced to care about everyone else when no one cares about us? When you look at this massacre and all those beautiful Black people who were burned alive, and the ones who were harmed or even traumatized by just witnessing this, if they were white people with blonde hair and blue eyes, the world would have stopped. You understand what I'm saying? The world would have came to a screeching halt, and everybody would have paid attention to Yemen. So to what the Houthis are doing to people in Yemen, and that is very indicative of this country, this world that we live in. We have become desensitized to Black pain globally. We have become desensitized to brown pain, to the suffering of Palestinians, okay, globally. It is, and you saw that in news coverage of what was happening in Ukraine. You saw newscasters saying, hey, these are civilized people this is happening to. These are people who look like us that this is happening to. This isn't some third world or developing country that this is happening, and this is happening in Europe. So even the news in their portrayal of the atrocities that are happening in the Ukraine is racist in and of itself, right? And you think about why we don't stick together and why we don't rise up and join. And it's because we are punished for speaking out, okay? We are put on federal watch list. Sometimes some activists I know are banned from different countries. You had Donald Trump, when he was president, accused me of treason for speaking out for Black people. So we have this system that punishes people for speaking out against white supremacy, who speak out against Black pain and suffering and racism. And if you don't do it in a way that's acceptable, listen to this. This is white supremacy. If you do not voice your concerns and your pain in a way that's acceptable to mainstream white society, then you are deemed some sort of terrorist or some sort of villain. And what are you doing? Are you harming people? No, you're simply fighting for people. So it's a lot of mind games that are being played. There's a lot of manipulation. And let's face it, society is good at it. They've been doing this for over 400 years. Like it's ingrained to us not to care about Black pain. That's why we need a network. We need news outlets. We need our own social media platforms that will allow us to highlight our issues and tell our stories. Malcolm X said, he who controls the media controls the world. This is how they control the narrative. So we need to get our own narrative out there. That's why I give credit to you, sister, for hosting this, for putting forth a proper narrative. And I, like my brother Ahmed said, folks need to get involved. This is not a every other day. This is not a whenever something bad happens type of fight. White supremacy is working against us all every single day. So we must remain active and be consistent in our activism, whether it's Twitter, whether it's going to change.org, signing the petition, whether it's being out in the streets, whether it's going into the community. What we're doing with our new organization, Black Opportunities, we're going into the community and empowering people and educating our people. That's the only way we get there, is if we teach those of us who are not engaged in the fight what's happening, why it is happening, and how to push back. That's the only way we'll get liberation. And make no mistake about it, when Black people thrive, the world thrives. when Black people get rights, all other folks get rights. You look at the you know, the right to vote in America, Black folks, Jim Crow, when we ended segregation. When you think of all the opportunities that non-whites have in America, the majority of those battles were won by Black people, which goes to say God likes when you do right by Black people, and he rewards us all for it.
Thank you so much, Haq. I think there's so much we can say and like honestly talk about, you know, from that angle. If you looked at, forget about the rest of the whole world, just look at the American civil rights movement. If you know, from America, from 400 years of, you know, basically from free man who becoming over time slave, you know, came as, if you look at the 1690s, a Black man was owning property, was a free man, just like any Americans at the time. And eventually by 18 and 19, he became fully slave, so he have to emancipate. And it's only 50, 60 years ago, the Brown versus Board of Education, if you look at it. And then we're still feeling the effect of you know, mental slavery. You know, it's lots of the violence that I feel like we ourselves are part of, you know, to play. Of course, the system is against us, but I feel like we ourselves, again, everybody that's tuning in, thank you so much. There's a second, we supposed to have in the morning panel discussion in Oromo, but because of, you know, some of our speakers or panelists were from Yemen, so because, and then some of the one from Canada, they were at work time, so we kind of changed it in the evening. So we actually have that panel discussion coming up in about 5 minutes. I don't know if you guys have any last word you wanted to say. I'll give each of you guys 1 minute each for our audience. Thank you so much for tuning in. As all of my brothers and sisters have said up here, that you care about this, don't just scroll, tweet, sign the petition. Make sure you share it. Make sure you take part. If there is a protest that's going on, take part in it. Don't make it like, you know what I'm saying, it is easier just to, you know, kind of look the other way. That's the easy, but we pay price. And when we pay price, it's not like I pay price and you don't pay price. We actually do pay price somehow, one way or the other. So collectively, we really have to end this injustice. The world, if there's any good thing that came from Ukraine war, in my opinion, is it exposed the West, their racism, just like with the election of President Obama. Everybody's like, okay, we are opposed, you know, a racism or equality or affirmative action is not needed. Then comes, bam, Trump comes, and then it kind of walk up like, okay, maybe we do have a racism problem. And I think what the war in Ukraine did is, with the reporters, like, we're talking about people like us. This is unheard. There's a war going on. There was a refugee, and you know, yes, come, but that's another angle. It's like, but the brown ones, the Black ones, they subhuman. Is like, even though it doesn't say, but I feel like even to them it's a surprise that such a racism exists. So if a journalist can say such a racism on media, I can only imagine the kind of racism Europe is. You know what I'm saying? It only tells you when behind, if the professionals can say this and get away with it, and there's no prosecution or retaliation, and there's no outrage going on, it's part of the system. And that's why you don't see any kind of, and racism is in the Middle East against Black people. In the worst type of the racism happens in the Middle East, in the Arab countries, unfortunately. So anyway, I'll give you guys each about a minute. Please say a few things, and I'd love for us to come and continue this discussion from different angle, having just talking about it, because the Oromo narrative is very new. People don't know about it. You know what I'm saying? Everywhere we go, it's like, what is Oromo? What is Kush? You know what I'm saying? They don't understand. Like, really, Oromo it's a unique situation. So I would say, I don't know if I started with Teresa. Teresa, thank you so much for staying way over 30 minutes. And then take about a minute or so. And if you have anything, there's so much to be said, as you say, like you want to talk about the people you interview, you want to talk about what the UNHCR told us, how difficult it is to work under Houthis control in the south versus the north. There's so much you can say, I know, but take about a minute and just give us a closing remarks, and I'll give my brothers over here the same chance, and then I think maybe we can reschedule it.
Thanks. Yeah, so just really quickly, one of the main things that came out in our talks with the UNHCR and also the IOM is, how many barriers they're facing to being able to work. So for the UNHCR, they're no longer able to register refugees in the north. They're no longer basically functioning there because the Houthi authorities have basically denied them access, and they no longer have that mandate. So to show what kind of situation it is. And unfortunately, that means that the UNHCR, I think, is more liable to having things going on there that should be, like Hussam was talking about people maybe who work for the UNHCR having their own interests. And unfortunately, the irony there is that if the UNHCR isn't getting funding, if the West isn't paying attention, if we're not making this a really important issue that we need to be talking about, then that happens and they lose their power. And unfortunately, that service becomes itself corrupted in some way, really trying to do something, but they're unfortunately in a situation that doesn't permit them to do as much as they should. And the IOM, they also have been trying to run a program to return Oromo migrants to Ethiopia, because that seems, and in many ways seems like the only situation. They're stuck, these are people that were trying to get to Saudi Arabia or other countries, but get shot at the border when they try to cross. Then they get put into migrant detention centers where there is a lot of torture and sexual abuse as well. And currently, on top of that, the IOM actually hasn't been able to return anyone to Ethiopia because there's been a state of emergency in Ethiopia. So they've been stuck there. And to really show you, the IOM and the UNHCR have had a 95% funding shortfall. They're only getting 5% of what their projected needs are for the next year. So that means all of those services that they're supposed to be providing, they cannot provide. And why is that happening? Why is the rest of the world looking away and not putting those funds, that humanitarian assistance, really saying this is a priority? There are people dying. There are people that are being burnt alive. There's an entire humanitarian catastrophe happening, but these also really incredibly tragic and awful incidents. And unfortunately, another thing that came out in those talks with the UNHCR and the IOM is that there is an anti-Black sentiment in the Yemeni government, as well as the authorities, that's been getting worse, and has been getting worse over the last couple of years with the COVID pandemic. And that is also a reflection on what's been going on in the international community, on why we don't pay attention in the same way to these regions, in the same way to these conflicts as we do to Ukraine, to Europe, to other places where, unfortunately, as Hawk and as other colleagues here today have said, when people don't look like me, when we have Black and brown people that are dying, we aren't paying the same attention, and we're not being outraged in the same way. And that is appalling. And that's something that we should tweet and do what we can to make sure that that can't continue happening.
Thank you so much. I think Hassan, go ahead. I'll keep it to 2 minutes, 1 minute.
Actually, I definitely keep it because I took so much time the last time, and I just want to touch on what Teresa said and something that I forgot to mention in the beginning. There were instances, like after the ones that went to Aden, there were multiple instances of refugees actually taking boats back to Ethiopia, risking facing persecution back in Ethiopia. But a couple of boats actually flipped, and there's Yaadannoo news agency actually documented multiple boats of those survivors of the massacre, like drowning in the sea, going back to their homes. And in 2019, there's a Human Rights Watch report of exactly what Houthis basically had detained a group of Oromos and African migrants, took them to the Saudi border. So they were fought like in between two fires. They were shot at from the back to the Houthis of leave Yemen, and they were shot at from the front by the Saudis of you're not welcomed here. So that's why the idea of resettlement is very important. Yemen is not safe. Going back is not safe. Going to Saudi Arabia is not safe either. And I want to end by like quoting the general. Mason is a rapper and activist here in New York. In a freestyle, he says, "Daddy told me one thing that stayed inside of my brain: do the same thing, expect something different. You're insane." And we criticize the whole world for not caring about what is happening in Yemen because we're brown. Meanwhile, when something happens to the the darker shade of black people in Yemen, we're not. There's no outrage even from us. So in a way, we're doing the same thing that we're critical of. If there was a specific incident where there was a Yemeni American who went back to Yemen and was killed in a checkpoint, and there was a massive protest in the Bronx by the Yemeni community in Little Yemen, whereas when 450 people were burned alive, not a single protest came out, and that is on like that falls on us as Yemeni Americans, as a community. We have to do more, and I encourage everybody to do your part. The minimal you can do, the bare minimum right now. Share the petition, sign it, share it, and take part in the Twitter storm. I'll end with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father Mohammed.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll be quick, but first off, I want to say thank you to OLLAA and Bridges for Yemen for holding this panel and educating us on everything that is going on, the atrocities in Yemen and Ethiopia that are happening to the Oromo. So thank you so much for that. In addition to what Hussam said, I would encourage everyone, follow OLLAA, follow Bridges of Yemen, get on their newsletters so that you are up to date. When something happens, you can quickly, jump in, make your voices heard. And I think this whole, situation of like, we have racism everywhere. And, the Prophet, peace be upon him, in his last sermon, right, took it upon himself to warn our community, the Muslim community, about racism, right? And saying that, there is no superiority between the white and the black, the Arab and the non-Arab. And, I think he did that for a reason, because he knew somehow that even 1,300 years later, we're still going to be inflicted with this disease of racism. We see it amongst our own selves, like Hassan mentioned. We see it in others. We have to face that. We have to look ourselves in the mirror, and we have to realize that, one, we got to cut it out, right? Our liberation is tied with each other. That's very important. It's on the screen. No one is free while others are oppressed. Until we truly believe that and we start living that, we're not going to be liberated, as a community, right? Because, today, and it's always been the Black people who have been oppressed, but brown people are being oppressed as well. We want freedom for everybody. We have to act like it. We have to come together, and we have to call out oppression, no matter who's doing it. The Prophet himself said that, he would, punish his own daughter if she committed sin, right? If she did something wrong. But we ourselves cannot call out, our own community members. We cannot call out, individuals of our own skin color sometimes. And it's really shameful, and we have to hold ourselves accountable. Until we do that, this issue will continue to rear its ugly head. And so I just want to issue another, thank you and message of solidarity, that we're here with you. We're here to support you. And I'm so grateful to just learn from all of you tonight. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. All right, last but least, my brother Haq.
Thank you, sister, for moderating this exceptional and informative panel. Thank you to all who are listening. My prayers go out to all my brothers and sisters in war-torn lands. And I guess what I want to leave you with is a call to action. These are systems that are oppressing us. These are systems that are causing these horrific acts and these tragedies, like what brought us here today. And these systems have actors that are continuously working. We, the people, have the power. They have a lot of money. We have money. We just don't know how to pull it together. They have a lot of resources. We have resources. The fact of the matter is, evil people run the world right now. And if we want the world we live in, where there's love and acceptance, then we have to fight them in a way that they understand, right? Power concedes nothing unless they're faced with a powerful force. Now, I'm not telling people that they have to pick up arms or they have to destroy anything. But what I'm telling people is you have to come together. You have to come together. There is a way that we can work on your issues. There's a way that we can work on my issues. And there's a way that we could come together and fight all these battles together. But we have to get organized. We have to come together with groups like OLLAA. We have to come together with all of these groups that are doing these amazing works and figure out how we come together. We have to put egos aside. We have to put egos aside. It's not who's doing what, who's out front, what name is on top. It's not about that. What it's about is stopping people from being murdered, killed, and starved to death. And this is the way we do that is simply by coming together in a movement of love, of tough love, and figuring out how to free everyone. And I'm with you on that quote, brother. None of us are free until we're all free. Right on.
Thank you so much. That is a nice way to end it. None of us are free until we all are free. Have a good night, everyone, and good morning all over in Australia. And now we'll catch up on another one. Thank you for our audience, and please make sure you tweet, make sure you sign the petition, make sure you sign the letter, and sign up for Bridges for Yemen. OLLAA